Let's get ready for a deep dive, folks. Today we're going to be exploring the world of infectious diseases. You know how these tiny little invaders, pathogens, can really cause a lot of trouble in the body? We're going to be using excerpts from an OpenStax microbiology textbook to kind of guide us along the way. I think you're going to be surprised. You don't need a microscope to see how cool this stuff really is.
It really is incredible. These organisms have evolved all these strategies to survive and thrive. And unfortunately, a lot of times that's at our expense as the host. But, really understanding their tactics is the first step in figuring out how to fight back.
Exactly. So let's start with something I think we can all relate to, and that's the experience of just feeling sick. Yeah. Like when you catch a cold, and suddenly your head feels like a drum solo is happening inside of it, and your nose turns into a leaky faucet. Your body aches like you just ran a marathon. Those are classic signs of a pathogen setting up shop in your system.
And those things you just mentioned, the headache, the runny nose, the aches, those are what doctors call symptoms. And those are the subjective things that the patient feels and then reports to the doctor. But doctors also look for signs which are objective, measurable things like fever or a rash.
Right. So those are clues.
Yeah.
That help them piece together what's making you sick.
Yeah.
But it's not always an infection, right? Sometimes it's something else entirely.
Absolutely. There are non-infectious diseases like genetic disorders or conditions that are caused by environmental factors. But even within the world of infectious diseases, there are distinctions. Some are communicable, meaning that they easily spread from person to person, like the flu or a cold, whereas others are non-communicable, meaning you can't catch them directly from someone else.
Oh, yeah. Like that time I got food poisoning from a questionable street vendor. Definitely not something I could pass on to a friend, thankfully. But whether it's a contagious cold or a really nasty bout of food poisoning, there's usually a predictable pattern to how a disease unfolds, right?
That's right. It starts with the incubation period, where the pathogen is quietly multiplying inside you. You don't feel anything. And then comes the prodromal period where you start to sense something's off. Maybe you're a bit tired, achy, like a storm is brewing on the horizon.
Oh, yeah. That dreaded, I think I'm coming down with something.
Yeah.
Feeling. And then, bam, you're hit with a period of illness. You've got full-blown symptoms. The storm has arrived. Hopefully your immune system rallies. And you enter the period of decline. You're starting to feel better. The pathogen is being pushed back.
And finally, if all goes well, you reach the period of convalescence where you're back to your old self, hopefully a bit wiser from the experience. Of course, the length of each stage can vary, depending on the pathogen, and just how healthy you are overall.
Okay, so we've got the basic storyline of an infection, but how do scientists actually figure out which microscopic culprit is responsible for a specific disease? It's like a real-life detective story.
Exactly. They use a set of criteria called Koch's postulates, which are kind of like a microbial fingerprint analysis. First, you have to isolate the suspected pathogen from a sick individual. Then you have to grow it in a pure culture. You're kind of creating a wanted poster with its mugshot on it. Then you introduce it into a healthy individual.
And if that individual gets the same disease, and you can find the same pathogen in them, well, you've got your culprit. But I imagine there are some limitations to this approach.
Oh, you're right. Not all pathogens can be grown in a lab. And some only cause disease in specific hosts, or under very particular conditions. That's where the molecular Koch postulates come in, focusing on identifying the genes that are responsible for a pathogen's virulence, essentially how good it is at making you sick.
Yeah, some pathogens are like master criminals.
Yeah.
Highly skilled at causing chaos. But how do they actually do it? What makes them so good at making us feel so awful?
That's where we get into the fascinating world of virulence factors. These are the tools that pathogens use to evade our defenses, and just wreak havoc. It's like a microscopic arsenal. Each weapon is designed for a specific purpose. And that's what we'll be exploring next. Welcome back to our deep dive. Before the break, we were talking about virulence factors. These are the tools that pathogens use to make us sick. And there's a whole fascinating array of weapons, each with its own unique way of wreaking havoc.
It's kind of terrifying.
Yeah.
But also amazing to think about these microscopic battles that are raging inside of us all the time. So what are some of the most effective weapons in a pathogen's arsenal?
Well, one of the most notorious weapons are toxins. These are poisonous substances that can disrupt our cells and tissues in a variety of ways. Bacteria, for instance, can produce exotoxins, which are proteins that they actively secrete. Think of them like guided missiles, targeting specific parts of our body.
And those names, exotoxins. They sound as dangerous as they are right. Can you give us some examples of what these toxins can do?
Oh, absolutely. One particularly nasty example is the cholera toxin. produced by Vibrio cholerae. That's the bacteria responsible for cholera. This toxin goes right for the cells lining our intestines, causing them to pump out massive amounts of fluids, leading to severe diarrhea and dehydration.
Oh, that sounds absolutely miserable. It's incredible how such a tiny little molecule can have such a devastating effect. Are there other examples of these targeted attacks?
Definitely. Some exotoxins, like the tetanus toxin, produced by Clostridium tetani, interfere with nerve signaling, leading to muscle spasms and paralysis. Others, like the botulinum toxin produced by Clostridium botulinum, do the opposite. They block nerve signals, causing a different type of paralysis.
Wow, so these toxins are incredibly diverse in their effects. But we also talked about endotoxins, right? How do those differ from the exotoxins?
Endotoxins work a bit differently. They're not actively secreted, but are actually part of the outer membrane of certain bacteria, specifically gram-negative bacteria. When these bacteria die and their cell walls break down, these endotoxins are released, triggering a really powerful inflammatory response.
So even in death, these bacteria can still cause trouble. What kind of effects do these endotoxins have on our bodies?
In small doses, the inflammation they cause can actually be beneficial, helping our immune system clear an infection. But in large amounts, endotoxins can trigger a cascade of harmful effects: fever, chills, aches, and in severe cases, even septic shock, which can be life-threatening.
That explains why infections with gram-negative bacteria can be so serious. So we've got these powerful toxins, but then there are also those molecular scissors you mentioned earlier, the exoenzymes. How do they contribute to a pathogen's attack?
Exoenzymes are like a demolition crew, breaking down the barriers that hold our bodies together, allowing the pathogen to spread and invade deeper. One example is hyaluronidase, aptly nicknamed the spreading factor, because it breaks down hyaluronic acid, a substance that helps hold our cells together.
So they're essentially cutting their way through our defenses. Are there other examples of these exoenzymes at work?
Oh, there are plenty. Collagenase, for instance, breaks down collagen, a major component of our connective tissues, further aiding in a pathogen's spread. And then there's coagulase, which is really fascinating.
What's so special about coagulase?
Well, it's produced by some bacteria like Staphylococcus aureus. It might seem counterintuitive, but coagulase actually causes blood to clot, which can help the bacteria by walling them off from our immune cells.
So they're creating their own little fortress, hiding out in a blood clot. That's sneaky. But aren't there also exoenzymes that work against these clots?
Yes, some bacteria fight back with kinases, which break down fibrin, a key protein involved in blood clotting. This can dissolve the clots our body forms to trap bacteria, allowing them to escape and spread. It's a constant back and forth, a molecular arms race.
Okay, so pathogens have these ways of invading and spreading. But what about evading our immune system? How do they manage to stay under the radar?
That's where we get into some really impressive tactics. One common strategy is antigenic variation, which we touched on earlier. It's essentially the pathogen's ability to change the proteins on its surface, making it harder for our immune cells to recognize and target them.
So instead of a fixed wanted poster, it's like the pathogen is constantly changing its disguise.
Exactly. And some pathogens are masters of this. Influenza viruses are a great example. Their ability to undergo antigenic variation, constantly shifting their appearance, is why we need a new flu shot every year.
Makes sense. It's like they're always one step ahead. Are there other pathogens that are particularly good at evading our defenses?
Oh, definitely. Neisseria gonorrhea, the bacterium that causes gonorrhea, is notorious for its ability to change its surface proteins, making it very difficult to develop effective vaccines. And then there are pathogens like Mycobacterium tuberculosis, which causes tuberculosis, that take a different approach.
What do they do?
They actually hide inside our own cells, becoming invisible to our immune system surveillance. It's like they found a secret bunker, safe from attack.
That's incredible. They're using our own bodies against us. And what about those capsules we talked about earlier? How do those help with evasion?
Capsules are like slippery invisibility cloaks surrounding some bacteria. They make it difficult for our immune cells to grab hold and destroy them. It's a passive defense, allowing them to slip past unnoticed.
So it's a combination of stealth, disguise, and brute force. These pathogens are truly remarkable in their ability to survive and thrive, even in the face of our really powerful immune system. It's amazing how much is happening at the microscopic level. We're completely unaware of.
Absolutely. And we've only just scratched the surface. There's a whole other world of eukaryotic pathogens, fungi, protozoa, and helminths, with their own unique strategies for causing disease. So we spent a lot of time talking about bacteria and viruses, but let's not forget about the other players in this microscopic world, the eukaryotic pathogens, fungi, protozoa, and helminths. They might not be as well known as their bacterial and viral counterparts, but they have also evolved some pretty fascinating and effective ways of causing disease.
That's true. We tend to focus on bacteria and viruses. But these eukaryotic pathogens are equally important to understand. So where should we start?
Well, let's begin with fungi. They often fly under the radar, but they can cause a surprisingly wide range of infections, from superficial skin issues like athlete's foot to serious systemic infections that can even be life-threatening.
Oh, yeah. I remember learning about Candida albicans in biology class. It's a type of yeast that lives on our skin and in our gut. But it can cause all sorts of problems if it gets out of control. What makes it so opportunistic?
Well, Candida is a perfect example of how a normally harmless organism can become a troublemaker. When the conditions are right, it usually coexists peacefully with us. But if our immune system is weakened, or there's a disruption in our normal microbiota, it can seize the opportunity to cause infection. And it has a whole arsenal of virulence factors at its disposal. Adhesins to stick to our cells, exoenzymes to break down tissues, and even capsules to help it evade our immune system.
It's like Candida's just waiting for its chance to strike.
Yeah.
Are all fungi opportunistic like that?
Not at all. Some fungi are considered primary pathogens, meaning that they can cause disease even in healthy individuals. Cryptococcus neoformans is a good example. It's a particularly sneaky pathogen because it has a thick capsule that helps it evade our immune system. And it can even spread to the brain, causing a serious condition called meningitis.
Wow, that's a reminder that we shouldn't underestimate the power of fungi. Now, what about protozoa? How do those single-celled organisms manage to cause disease?
Well, protozoa are a diverse group, and they've evolved a wide range of survival strategies. Some, like Plasmodium falciparum, the parasite that's responsible for malaria, have these complex life cycles that involve multiple hosts and different stages of development. It's quite remarkable. Plasmodium infects red blood cells, causing them to rupture, which leads to the classic cycles of fever and chills that we associate with malaria.
Malaria is such a devastating disease, especially in tropical regions. Are there other protozoan diseases that are more common worldwide?
Yes, giardiasis is another one that's quite common. It's caused by the protozoan Giardia lamblia, a gut parasite that can cause severe diarrhea, abdominal cramps, and bloating. It's often spread through contaminated water, so it's really important to take precautions when traveling to areas with poor sanitation.
So even these microscopic organisms can have a huge impact on our health. Okay, let's move on to the helminths, the worms. They seem so different from bacteria and viruses. It's hard to imagine how they could be so successful at causing infections.
Well, you might think they'd be easy targets for our immune system. But helminths are masters of disguise and immune evasion. Some coat their outer surface with molecules that mimic those found on our own cells, effectively camouflaging themselves. Others release substances that suppress our immune response, preventing a full-blown attack. And some, like the hookworm, have specialized mouth parts that allow them to latch onto the lining of our intestines and feed on our blood.
Okay, that's officially both fascinating and terrifying. It's incredible how these parasites have developed such intricate strategies for survival within our bodies.
It really speaks to the constant evolutionary battle between pathogens and their hosts. And the more we learn about these intricate mechanisms, the better equipped we are to develop effective treatments and prevention strategies.
This has been a really eye-opening journey into the world of pathogens. It's amazing to think about all these microscopic battles that are happening inside of us all the time.
It really is a hidden world, full of drama and complexity. And while we've covered a lot of ground today, there's still so much more to learn. I encourage you to keep exploring, digging deeper into any specific pathogens or virulence factors that have piqued your curiosity.
That's great advice. The microbial world is full of surprises, just waiting to be uncovered. So until next time, stay curious and keep exploring the fascinating world around and within you.